Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If we could ask members of the committee to take their seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à la Comité des finances et de développement économique pour le 6 octobre. Welcome to FEDCO, October 6, 2015. If anyone would like to speak to any item on the agenda, you can fill out a form just under that television screen and hand it to the clerk, and we'd be pleased to hear from you. Declarations of interest, déclaration d'intérêt. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès verbaux le 1er septembre 2015, 1st of September 2015. Carried. Communications as presented.
Mr. Mayor, could I just ask for a copy of that report when it's completed?
What the independent assessment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, note it. City Manager's Office, City Clerk, and Solicitor Service de Greffier Municipal. Le comité consultatif sur les services en français, plan de travail 2015 à 2018. Je pense que Joanne Leroux est ici. Est-ce qu'il y a une présentation, Madame Leroux? D'accord, on va retourner dans quelques minutes. Merci. So we'll hold that item and she's going to present. City Treasurer and Finance, we have a presentation on that, so we'll come back to that. Bank Loan Authorization Agreement Bylaw Règlement sur l'entente entre raison et une prête bancaire. This is, as you know, in lieu of the debenture committee. It's now being dealt with by FEDCO on the item. Carried. Councillor Eli El-Shantiri has the motion to enact the bylaw. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That the following bylaw of the City of Ottawa be given 3 readings and enacted by the Finance and Economic Development Committee in accordance with the delegated authority. Bylaw 3 reading, bylaw of the City of Ottawa to authorize the borrowing of the money and bank loan in principal amount of $6 million toward the cost of certain capital works of the City of Ottawa.
Adopté. Carried. Enactment of confirmation bylaw, adoption de ratification de règlement municipal. Conseiller El-Shantiri, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That the following bylaws of the City of Ottawa be given 3 readings and enact the Finance Economic Development Committee in accordance with the delegated authority. Bylaw 3 readings.
Carried.
Okay.
Carried. Merci. Thank you, Councillor. Economic Development Branch, Direction de Développement Économique, Bank Street Business Improvement Area Boundary Adjustment. Carried. Downtown Rideau Business Improvement Area, ajustement de limite de la zone d'amélioration commerciale du centre-ville Rideau. There's a motion to refer this back to staff. Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you.
And I believe the concurrence of the ward councillor, Councillor Fleury. So we'll.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mayor, Bloom and myself, that whereas the Economic Development and Innovation Department has been undertaking a review of the downtown Rideau BIA boundaries following a request from this BIA board to consider a boundary adjustment, and where city staff have been consulting with the downtown Rideau BIA board to finalize the proposed boundary maps on the property to be included. Therefore, be it resolved that Downtown Rideau Business Improvement Area Boundary Adjustment Report be referred back to the Economic Development and Innovation Department for further review and consultation with the Downtown Rideau BIA Board.
So on referral to staff. Carrie?
Carrie.
Thank you. Inclusion of national partners in Ottawa 2017 Visibility, inclusion de partenariats nationaux dans la visibilité d'Ottawa 2017. Carried. Planning and Infrastructure, Urbanisme et Infrastructure, Brownfield Redevelopment Community Improvement Plan, Update and Amendments. There's a technical amendment from Councillor Harder as Chair of the Planning Committee. Staff are prepared to do a presentation. Does anyone like to have a presentation on this item? So, Councillor Harder, can you introduce the technical amendment? This tries to capture those proposals, as I understand it, Councillor, that were caught in the process to get them through before the new rules come into effect.
Yes, that's right, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for considering this amendment. Well, the motion is with regard to the date, and as with any of our practices here at this, with the development charges, for example, we always have made sure that the industry, in that case, are the one that actually know about it ahead of time. That wasn't the case in this case, and so September 29th, the agenda only went live on, what was the date? The 20 what? The 29th, and so there was no ability, no conversation whatsoever, and because we need to do this, as you can see in the report, we felt that it was to the benefit of fairness that any of the applications that were in any of the brownfield development that were in the plans, either from the developer that we knew about as of September 29th, but then giving them the opportunity to bring in a complete application by the day before council will actually vote on it. So that's why the date's been changed to October the 13th.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Harder. Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Real Estate Partnership and Development Office, Bureau de Partenariat et Développement en Immobilier, lease assignment 200 Island Lodge Road.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think we also have to deal with the item itself.
Oh, you're correct. I'm sorry.
Even before our specialist started moving, I sensed her presence.
So on the motion as amended?
Carried.
Thank you. Real Estate Partnerships, Partenariat et Développement, lease assignment 200 Island Lodge Road, 200 Chemin Island Lodge. This is a transfer of ownership of the Rockcliffe retirement residence. Carried. Item number 11, application for approval to expropriate lands combined sewerage storage tunnel dans les quartiers Rideau Vanier, Somerset et Capital. Carried. Information previously distributed, economic development update, charitable and vacancy rebate annual report. Councillor Taylor has a motion. Councillor Taylor, if you'd like to move this, and we have to get it on the agenda because it's an information item. So this is a charitable and vacancy rebates annual report, rapport annuel de 2014 des allègements pour immeubles inoccupés ou organismes de bienfaisance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So first and foremost, I'd request that Finance and Economic Development Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration at today's meeting. Carried. Thank you very much. And this is an item that was brought to our attention by our finance staff and dovetails both, you have a copy in front of you, dovetails both a request from our city, our council, February 13th, 2013, to the province of Ontario to review the eligibility criteria and limit the access to the rebate period to 3 years for certain kinds of derelict properties, and also upon a resolution of the Haldimand County Council where they brought this to the Minister of Finance's attention. Essentially what it is a request that the Ministry of Finance go back and look at the legislation with respect to the vacancy rebate program because it's been found that it's not being used with the spirit of the legislation. The spirit of the legislation is such that properties, if they're vacant, there's a tax break to the owners so that they can receive that tax break while they're trying to rent it. It's not meant to be an opportunity for them to get out of paying taxes. So it's very lengthy, but you have a copy in front of you. What I'm requesting is that it be resolved that the city support the resolution from Haldimand County and request that the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Municipal Affairs review the eligibility criteria for property tax rebates for vacancies pursuant to Section 364 of the Municipal Act 2001 to ensure that the eligibility criteria reflects the intent of the legislation and consider the impact on municipal revenues.
So this, Haldeman had an interest in this, I believe, because a company in Hamilton, a steel company, locked its workers out and then claimed it was vacant and then wanted a reduced tax rate, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this has the potential to snowball into other groups looking for a break. And I think we have been very clear as a council that this policy or this program of a rebate for vacant property is there to help a business that's in transition, but not for a building that is going to remain vacant and an eyesore for years, as we've seen on King Edward, as we've seen in the Market, Bank Street, and Old Ottawa South. And we've been very clear that it's unacceptable for a landowner to keep a building in a deteriorating condition and then, in essence, have their tax rate reduced to about 50% of what they should be paying. So there are two issues here. There's one that is, I think, very relevant that Councillor Taylor has brought forward so that we close any loopholes on a go-forward basis, but also we have that outstanding request from the provincial government that they do something to ensure that these derelict properties are not being rewarded and the owners are not being rewarded with a lower tax rate. I think it's patently unfair to those men and women who keep their buildings in good, proper, decent condition. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres commentaires ou questions sur ce sujet? No? On Councillor Taylor's motion, carried. Okay, so we'll go back to our first item. On va commencer avec le président de la comité consultatif sur la langue française. Bonjour, madame. Je pense que vous êtes ici au nom des membres de votre comité. C'est Joanne Leroux, la présidente. Merci pour votre service et vous avez un petit discours pour nous autres et je pense que tous les membres du comité avaient une copie. Et aussi, il y a l'interprétation pour tous les membres du comité et la salle. There's a simultaneous translation for everyone if you require it. Madame Leroux, bienvenue et c'est votre tour.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le maire, Mesdames les conseillères, Messieurs les conseillers, membres du Comité des finances et du développement économique. Je suis Joanne Leroux, présidente du Comité consultatif sur les services en français. Merci de m'offrir l'occasion de vous présenter les objectifs que le comité s'est fixés dans le but d'élaborer son plan de travail pour l'exercice 2015-2018. Mais avant de vous en faire part, je suis fière de vous annoncer que le comité a fait preuve de vision à plus long terme. Il a dressé un plan de travail qui s'échelonnera jusqu'à la fin de son mandat en 2018. Bien entendu, une révision annuelle s'imposera et un rapport vous sera présenté chaque fois par la suite. Nous croyons que cette approche nous permettra de mieux rencontrer notre mandat à titre de comité consultatif auprès du conseil municipal en ce qui concerne la mise en œuvre de la politique du bilinguisme et son application aux services, programmes, politiques et initiatives de la Ville. En 3 ans, nous comptons tisser et entretenir des liens étroits de collaboration avec les divers responsables des services municipaux en les invitant à nos rencontres de façon récurrente. Certes, les présentations des invités à titre informatif alimenteront la réflexion des membres qui se sont donné comme mission de réagir en proposant des recommandations pour soutenir les initiatives de services en français. Enfin, le calendrier de travail compris dans notre plan fera en sorte que les membres bénévoles du comité pourront se répartir les tâches en sous-comités et mieux gérer leur temps de préparation des dossiers. Suite à mon allocution devant vous le 29 juin dernier, les membres du comité consultatif sur les services en français ont retenu les priorités suivantes pour la durée de leur mandat, soit la prospérité économique, des communautés saines et bienveillantes et enfin l'excellence des services. Notre plan de travail comporte 5 objectifs et 8 activités pour vous appuyer dans votre quête de l'excellence des services en français et de responsabilité fiscale. Pour ce qui est de la prospérité économique, notre premier objectif est de soutenir l'élaboration d'une programmation et d'activités promotionnelles entièrement bilingues dans le cadre du 150e anniversaire de la Confédération du Canada. En créant des liens de collaboration avec Ottawa 2017, nous espérons contribuer à assurer la présence d'un français de qualité dans les activités promotionnelles et la programmation, ainsi que la publication simultanée de documents dans les 2 langues officielles. Nous espérons aussi conseiller Ottawa 2017 en ce qui a trait à la production des outils de promotion de la Ville d'Ottawa qui mettent en valeur son caractère bilingue francophone et anglophone lors des célébrations du 150e anniversaire et qui permettent de distinguer les diverses communautés qui la composent. Notre deuxième objectif est de soutenir la croissance d'entreprises francophones et francophiles à Ottawa. Nous souhaitons conseiller le service d'innovation et de développement économique en matière d'élaboration d'une stratégie de communication aux entreprises afin de tisser des liens solides avec les communautés d'affaires francophones et francophiles à Ottawa. En ce qui concerne les communautés saines et bienveillantes, notre troisième objectif propose une démarche favorisant le rattrapage en termes d'offres d'activités récréatives en français. En collaboration avec les services des parcs, des loisirs et de la culture, nous comptons nous renseigner pour ensuite lui offrir des conseils afin de soutenir et de rehausser les activités récréatives en français dans l'ouest de la ville, tout en conservant l'offre de qualité déjà en place pour les autres communautés. Pour ce qui est d'améliorer l'équité et l'inclusion de la population diversifiée de la ville, notre quatrième objectif vise une démarche favorisant une diversification des méthodes de recrutement des employés municipaux afin d'attirer un plus grand nombre de candidats bilingues à tous les échelons de l'organigramme, qu'il s'agisse d'employés de première ligne, de gestionnaires ou de la direction. Nous chercherons à tisser des liens avec le service des ressources humaines afin de nous renseigner sur le nombre de postes désignés bilingues à la Ville d'Ottawa. De plus, nous aimerions collaborer avec l'élaboration de stratégies de communication liées aux nouveaux arrivants et aux nouvelles arrivantes, y compris ceux et celles qui parlent français. Enfin, l'excellence des services. Notre cinquième objectif est de poursuivre la sensibilisation des employés à l'offre active de services bilingues. Nous prévoyons donner des conseils à la gestionnaire des services en français afin qu'il développe des stratégies additionnelles pour encourager tous les employés de la Ville d'Ottawa à suivre les modules de formation en ligne « Une ville, 2 langues ». Par la suite, nous aimerions recevoir des informations et données statistiques annuelles sur le taux de participation de tous les employés de la Ville d'Ottawa. En conclusion, le Comité consultatif sur les services en français est fier de son plan de travail adopté pour la durée de son mandat et réitère son engagement à collaborer avec les services et élus municipaux dans la rencontre des objectifs adoptés par la Ville. Merci. Est-ce qu'il y aurait des questions?
Alors, merci beaucoup, Madame Leroux, et encore merci pour le travail. Alors, tous les membres de ce comité sont des bénévoles. Je pense que le conseiller Jean Cloutier avait un commentaire. Cloutier.
Merci, Monsieur le maire, et merci, Madame Leroux, en tant que coprésident d'Ottawa 2017 avec le conseiller Fleury et au nom de tout le comité organisateur. Merci des services consultatifs de langue française. We absolutely want the participation from all the communities in Ottawa, francophone, anglophone, ceux à Osgood, à Goulburn, to participate in Ottawa 2017, and this is one way. So it is an important, and thank you for passing the motion earlier today on the logos and the branding that we are trying to get going for Ottawa 2017. So merci, Madame Leroux, de tous vos efforts. Et puis, oui, de la part d'Ottawa 2017, nous préparons une belle célébration qui sera à la hauteur des attentes de toutes nos communautés ici dans la ville. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Mayor.
Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres questions? Conseiller El-Shantiri.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and merci, Joanne, for your good work on the committee, and also to engage our community at large with the 2017, also for your endorsement to have the BIA of the City of Ottawa also, or what we call Council of BIA, to be involved. So I want to thank you, and Mr. Mayor, I would like to thank Michelle Rached, our French language manager, for working closely with Joanne, presenting a comprehensive business plan till 2018. Félicitations, Madame. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci, conseiller. Alors, je pense que c'est we received, or it's carried, I'm sorry. Carried, adopté. Merci encore.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Le prochain item, c'est numéro 2, le budget 2016-2018, proposed 2016-2018 budget. We have the process, we have one motion from Councillor El-Shantiri, a technical amendment. We'll just ask him to present that. Then I have some remarks, then we have a presentation, and then Councillor Eglai has a direction to staff, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Councillor El-Shantiri on a technical amendment with respect to the dates.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This technical amendment speaks about the budget timeline. Whereas the report, the proposed 2016 budget timeline and 2016-2018 budget direction, including a proposed 2016 budget timeline in document 1, where errors in the dates listed for the tabling of the draft budget with Council and for consideration of the budget for the Ottawa Public Library Board on the Ottawa Public Health Board, therefore be it resolved that the following date in document 1 be amended as follows. In Part 2, tabling of draft budget with Council, November 12, Thursday. In Part 4, Ottawa Public Library Board, December 1st, Tuesday. In Part 4, Public Health Board, December 7, Monday. In Part 4, Audit Committee, November 26, Thursday. This is the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions on the amendment? Carried.
Okay.
I'd like to begin by thanking our treasurer, our city manager, and their teams for their hard work on this document. 5 years ago, the City Council decided to bring greater financial discipline to the budget process. We did this by enacting a predictable, affordable tax target. It allowed us to set a goal and work hard to deliver on that commitment. Many members of Council were re-elected based on the results of this approach. In fact, when seeking election, all members of this particular committee supported 2% or lower. Some even campaigned on an even lower target, the inflation rate, which is running at 1.4%. Tous les membres de ce comité ont été élus en prenant 2% ou moins. To look at this matter before us today, it is proposed that we continue this fiscal discipline. In brief, the budget guidelines document lays out a solid plan to continue this predictable, realistic strategy. It also asks staff to come back with recommended efficiencies and solutions that do not affect our core services and priorities. When we face budget pressures, residents expect us to work hard to find solutions. Quand nous faisons face à des pressions budgétaires, les résidents s'attendent à ce que nous trouvions des solutions. C'est pourquoi ils nous ont élus. And that's what we'll be doing in the coming months. In a $3 billion organization, there are certainly many ways to save money and find efficiencies. Maybe there are five-step processes that only need 3 steps. Maybe we don't need so many levels of middle management in some areas. Maybe there are buildings and properties that can be consolidated or can be sold. So let's put this into perspective. In 2016, the city needs to trim its spending and find efficiencies of about 1.5 to 2% of its total budget of $3.2 billion. In 2017, we'll need to find about 1% and another 1% in 2018. Think of a family or a small business in our community. It's obvious to me that if their revenue was down by 1%, that family or business would immediately start to problem solve. They would find solutions for paring back their spending. I'm certain that it would not be that challenging for most to find 1 or 2 cents out of every dollar to save. If anything, this is an opportunity to create a more nimble, effective organization. To start us on our way, staff have proposed some very common sense measures, using earned in social media instead of as much paid advertising, holding off on some of our non-essential vehicle purchases, and reducing overtime expenses. We should look internally before we ask others to pay more. At the same time, we'll protect our priorities and our core services. We'll still build light rail transit, Arts Court, and the Bayview Innovation Center. Nous allons quand même de protéger nos services essentiels et construire le train léger, le cours des arts et le centre d'innovation Bayview. We will still invest record amounts in affordable housing, and we will still provide excellent core services and frontline services at an affordable price. Despite our budget challenges, we will maintain our commitments to build a more compassionate, sustainable, and dynamic city. I'm asking members, committee, and council to show sensible, responsible leadership by supporting these recommendations today. Let's maintain our commitment to set a low, affordable tax target for the coming years. With an uncertain economy, residents are seeing their own personal investments and retirement plans facing some challenging times. Let's do what we can to give some certainty and predictability for their own family budget. And let's not forget that the property tax bill can be a significant expense for many in our community. For those living on fixed incomes, particularly our seniors, a high tax bill could mean the difference between home ownership and foreclosure. Let's not download our own budget challenges on the back of families. We need to be cognizant of the impact on our small businesses as well. I've walked down along many commercial streets in the downtown core, and I've been concerned by the impact that impact reassessments will have on business owners, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. Our 2% tax will pale in comparison to what they might feel during the next round of reassessments in 2017. And I've seen evidence of this through the for sale or lease signs on many windows on Bank Street, Beechwood, Elgin, Richmond, to name a few. Some properties in the core have seen a tax shift of up to 8.5% over the last few years due to reassessment, even before Council considered any tax increase at all. We need to keep taxes low so that we do not make it more difficult for these businesses to afford office or storefront space. We need to look internally at our own lines of business instead of passing off our budget challenges to small businesses or families. Nous devons regarder sérieusement à l'interne plutôt que de refiler nos défis budgétaires aux petites entreprises et aux familles. When we look ahead to Budget 2016, we must protect our priorities and our core services, and we must also live within our means. I look forward to working with all of you to rise to this challenge. Ensemble, nous allons relever les défis. And we have a presentation by the Treasurer, and then Councillor Eglai has a direction, and then we'll go to questions. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by introducing Isabel Jasmine, for those of you who don't know her. And what I wanted to say is that I will be off on medical leave when this budget is being tabled, and Isabel is going to be running the budget for you. You're in good hands. So we'll start. So this is a directions report that's in front of you and a timetable for 2016. We're going to talk about why we had to do a multi-year approach this time, what we are proposing as both your budget envelopes, your tax targets, and the strategies both for the citywide transit and for water and sewer. And then we will look specifically at the 2016 timetable. This is a very high-level discussion, as it always is when we're setting the budget guideline. I know you're all interested in knowing the details about what's the rate increase going to be for swimming lessons, or for how much more are we spending on fuel. But those are details that I don't have at this point in time. We are working on those now, and those will all become known when we table the budget on November the 12th. So the budget process that you approved as part of the governance report basically said that the treasurer would come to committee and council with a direction report prior to the development of the draft budgets. You also changed your consultation process, so you have been out consulting with the public prior to the draft budgets being delivered as well. Any recommended budgetary increase, tax increase, was to be allocated to the various boards and commissions on a pro rata basis, and you also approved that the city manager was to work with the mayors to develop budgets that are consistent with the directions that you would approve. So why did we have to do a multi-year approach? When we were doing the 2015 budget in February, at that time we already knew we had a significant problem in the winter maintenance area, and that we couldn't continue to sustain that budget at that level on a go-forward basis. There were also a number of other items that the city manager was anticipating would come through during the year, which led us to believe that looking at our 2016 budget, we would have a number of financial challenges we would need to meet in that year. And so in order to allow us the time to deal with all of those additional pressures coming forward, we spread it over a 3-year picture, and that's basically what I'll show you later on in this presentation. So this would allow, looking at it over a longer term, allows us to develop and implement strategies that allow us to achieve your term priority of financial sustainability. And financial sustainability means that you're keeping your tax increases at an affordable level while still delivering the programs and services that your residents want and need, and maintaining and rehabilitating the infrastructure that we are responsible for. So the proposed budget directions are that we would have an annual increase to the property taxes for the citywide levy. The citywide levy pays basically for all city services other than transit and a portion of fire at 1.75%. And that this translates into, because of the issue that we have with the commercial ratios and the way we actually spread property taxes over the properties based on assessment, results in a 2% increase for a residential property. We are also forecasting that your additional tax revenues you will generate from new growth on the assessment roll is at 1.3%. This is down significantly from where we were even last year. We were at 1.7, I think, 7.5, and in previous years we were at 2%. What you're seeing is, while the percentage is lower, the dollar value, because it's on a bigger base, is a little bit larger, but 1.3% represents basically what we're seeing out there, which is a slowdown in the overall economy. Also, we're requesting that the boards develop their budgets within their pro rata share of the tax revenue. So what does that look like? So a tax increase of 1.75% on the citywide levy only generates between $20.6 and $21.9 million in the 3-year time period. Assessment growth of 1.3% generates roughly between 15 to 16 million. So you have an envelope of revenue coming from taxation of between 36 to almost $38 million in this time period. So the allocation, based on what you adopted in the governance report, is that police will receive an increase of $7.2 million in 2016, and it'll increase all the way to $8 million by 2018. And they will build their budget in accordance with that. Public health, very small portion of public health is funded from the municipality, so their share is only $300,000, and it goes up to $400,000 by 2018. Public library, again, not a particularly large allocation to them because of the size of their budget. $1 million in tax revenue in 2016, going to 1.3 in 2018. And then the Auditor General, because he is outside of the city administration, gets a small increase, $40,000, goes up to $50,000. So that leaves, once you allocate those funds to the various other boards and agencies, leaves $27.4 million in 2016 for all the city services other than transit and rate, and that goes to $28 million in 2018. So that's the envelope size. So then the next thing we did in looking at this in a multi-year approach was we looked at what do we need to fix going into 2016, and then what are our pressures, our ongoing pressures in 16, 17, and 18 from all the other activities that we have. So the base pressures, which are really the crux of what we're talking about for 2016, include things like addressing the winter maintenance costs, bringing that budget to a level that's sustainable, addressing the workers' safety and insurance board costs, the arbitrated settlements for 14 and 15 that we received this year, adjusting the vacancy provision in your 24/7 operations, which is basically fire, paramedics, and long-term care, where they have vacancy provisions that they cannot achieve because of the fact that they have to have staff providing those services all the time. And then unachieved revenue targets, looking at all of the budgets that we have for revenue and adjusting those to levels that are reasonable and that we can achieve. And the biggest one is, as you know, is sponsorship, where we have not been able to achieve that budget since it was established. So those are the base pressures going into 2016, but then in addition to that, you also have all your regular pressures to maintain the services that you have. So you have your contract settlements in 2016, you have changes to your benefits, you have increases in your energy costs. So electricity in particular is rising at a fairly steep rate. And you have inflation on all your goods and services. And then on top of that, you have your growth. So we still have new infrastructure that we have to maintain. We've had increases in population where there's a demand for more service, and we've had demographic changes that reflect an increase or a decrease in the various services that we provide. So when we looked at all of those, what we ended up with, as you can see, is we have almost $13 million of base adjustments that we need to take care of, that are a result of what we are experiencing in 2015 that carry forward into 2016. We're recommending that those be fixed, and as you can see, we're assuming that there is no base adjustments on a go-forward basis, that we're able to take out those areas of risk within the budget and get those rectified in 2016. Maintaining services here is roughly $34 million a year, and that's, I think, is based on fairly conservative assumptions about what the rate of inflation will be. Growth is approximately $11 million a year, and it drops in 2018 because I don't think we have any facilities opening in that year. Your strategic initiatives, that's the one thing I can talk to you about in detail ad nauseum, because you've already approved all of those. Through your term of council priority setting session, you already have established what strategic initiatives you want to put forward and how they will be funded. So you have projected pressures ranging from $63 million in 2016 to $52 million in 2018. When we apply the taxes that we had on the other slide, that leaves you with net pressures of what we have to find of $36 million in 16 to $24 million in 18. As you can see, it's pretty front-end loaded. It's a very heavy number for 2016, and then it gets significantly lighter in the last 2 years. So how are we going to deal with that roughly $80 million in pressures over the next 3 years? There's a number of strategies that we're putting forward. These are just examples. These are not exclusive. There will be a number of other items that will be identified and put forward and presented to you as part of the budget. But right now we know that we need to identify reductions that do not affect service delivery. Service delivery standards and so on are the responsibility of council to change, not of the administration. So our objective is to find opportunities and ways to deliver the same services but at less cost. We will be reviewing and adjusting all the current revenue budgets. So, for example, sponsorship will go down, but there are other areas where we know that we've overachieved revenues, and we will be adjusting those upwards. We will be increasing the user fees and rates and charges as per your fiscal framework. Your fiscal framework says that you will increase those user fees and charges at the same rate that the cost of delivering that service is increasing. So if you have a program where the costs have gone up by 2%, you will increase the revenues, the user fees by 2%. If you have something that's 3%, you should be increasing that by 3%. We will also be looking at establishing a corporate efficiency target that will generate productivity savings from across the corporation writ large. Some of these include looking at administrative restructuring. Are there areas that can be consolidated, centralized, or even decentralized, if that makes more sense? Can we rationalize our accommodations? The City of Ottawa is a big user of space. We have a lot of buildings. What can we do to make certain that we've got the facilities that we have are fully utilized and the ones we don't need are disposed of? Reviewing the summer student program. We hire a large number of summer students. A look at that as to whether that's an effective use of taxpayers' dollars is probably warranted at this time. And then another example is reviewing fleet standards. How many vehicles do we have? Who are they assigned to? What are they used for? Is there another way to provide that fleet, but maybe with a different program, more pooling as opposed to individual allocation of vehicles? The next thing we'll be doing is we'll be establishing specific departmental efficiency targets based on an operational review of various areas. Already we know that we will have targets assigned to winter operations, and Mr. Wally's already been talking about the work that he's having done by KPMG to identify areas where they can reduce their costs. Paramedic services, looking at the back office, how we deliver services there, and fleet services as well, how much we provide in-house versus externally, really going back again to our standards. But every department in this city will have an efficiency target assigned to it as part of the budget, and all of those details will be identified within the budget document itself. The problem that I identified before, though, was because we need a long-term strategy, because it's so front-ended, what we're recommending is that for 2016 and 17 is that we bring in a one-time source of revenue to basically to give us enough runway to launch an efficiency program and find the savings that are needed. So for 2016, we are recommending that the fleet and equipment reserve that I think the mayor said we were going on a truck diet, that we defer the replacement of the $23 million in vehicles that were planned for 2016, and instead we use some of that money to actually go into as a one-time source of revenue to offset some of the pressures in 2016, allowing us to then find the solutions for those pressures in 17 and 18. While $23 million in deferral of purchases of fleet might seem dramatic, I will tell you that the plan is if there's increased maintenance that's required, to allow some of the fleet money in the reserve to go back to augment the maintenance. If there are cases that need to be where a vehicle actually does need to be replaced, that when you look at it there's no other decision to be made, that will come back and be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. There is sufficient money in the works in progress. There's over $10 million in the vehicle purchases that sit in the works in progress that give us enough flexibility to deal with this. And there still will be vehicles arriving, because the lead time for some of the vehicles that you purchase is 2 years. So there will still be new fleet being added in 2016, but there won't be any new authorization for fleet. So we take the $36 million that we had in net pressures, and then we look at any pressures we're carrying forward. The strategy basically says we're going to try to find almost $12 million in both revenues and user fees. It becomes a little bit more in 17 and 18, but strategies around that. Then there's efficiencies and base adjustments. We're looking anywhere between 13, and you can see it grows. The efficiency grows to almost $18 million in 2018. And then we bring in the one-time funding from the fleet reserve of $11.5 million. So there you're balanced in 2016. And as you know, we are required to table a balanced budget. But that $11.5 million of one-time gets carried forward into 2017. And again, that's why our target for efficiency grows in 2017. But we're not able to achieve it all in 2017, so we're still looking for $6.7 million. So in total, we're bringing in roughly $18 million of the 23 from the fleet maintenance reserve into 2016 and 2017. That allows you then to add $6.7 million more onto what you have to find in 2018, allowing you to balance the budget overall by 2018. So transit services, as you know, transit is not a service that is delivered at the same level across the city. So we actually have 3 transit levies. And we are recommending that, given the pressures that the transit services are facing, that the annual transit levy increase be at 2.5%, and this is what we had identified in the affordability model. Again, they would receive their pro rata share of the 1.3% assessment growth, and then user fees for transit would be set in alignment with the fiscal framework. And as you know, they actually have a revenue cost target which they are trying to achieve with their user fees, and they would be working towards that goal. So the base pressures for transit, again, we have significant issues from 2015 that need to be addressed in 2016, primarily around maintenance costs, but we've also identified that the insurance claims provision needs to be increased, and we have an adjustment that needs to be made in our projections for fare revenues, given the basically flat to small decrease in ridership that we're seeing this year. And then on top of that, you add all the maintain costs, which are the future increases in their labor contracts, inflations on energy, goods, and services. So the base adjustments for transit in 2016 are significant. $13.9 million is what we need to adjust for based on what they're achieving in 2015. They have roughly between $10 to $15 million a year in maintained costs. 2018 is a bit of an odd year. We put an asterisk beside it. You'll notice that their maintained costs are $23 million. That's because halfway through 2018, the Confederation line goes live. So you have a number of costs that disappear, and you have a number of new costs that appear. And so it's a real shakeup of their budget in 2018. But right now, with what we know, there's a $23.5 million just to maintain. There is no growth forecasted for transit services over those 3 years in accordance with what you had approved as their affordability model. So looking at what 2.5% tax increase generates for them and their share of assessment growth, they have between $9 to $10 million to offset those pressures, which leaves them with net pressures of approximately $15 million, and it's lower in 2017. So how is transit planning to deal with those pressures? First of all, is they are establishing an efficiency target, and they will have base budget adjustments, and they will generate productivity improvements. They have already started the reorganization work that they need to do to get themselves ready for mid-2018, and what structure they need to have in that time, and that will continue. They will be looking at revenue options consisting of a pricing review of the various fare instruments, sufficient to move toward Council's revenue cost target of 55%. If they do not move towards it, the intent is that they would actually try to maintain what they already had and not to move away from it. So there's the net pressures for transit. The efficiencies and base adjustments, there's a significant adjustment in 2016 that we're aware of, which is why you have $8.6 million on the line in 2016 for that. But there's a program in place, and it varies by year. revenues basically and user fees are pretty much constant, 6.6, and it jumps up in 2018 because there's assumptions about ridership and what opening the Confederation line will do to in terms of ridership. So again, there's they have found ways, or they will find ways to balance this, so at the end of the day, between the tax increase and what they've got on for budget strategies, you will have a balanced budget for your transit services. Water and sewer budgets. As most of you know, we are in the process of doing a significant review of how we actually pay for water, wastewater, and stormwater services, and we'll be coming back to you in early 2016 with recommendations on how to change that structure to both provide some more financial sustainability, but also to ensure equity among all of the users or beneficiaries of these services. As a result of that, we are recommending that for 2016, as we won't be able to tell you what the new structure will look like at this point in time, we're recommending that you continue with the 6% rate increase that was identified in 2012 for this year in the long-range financial plan for rate services. And this is the same increase that was adopted in 2015. So just quickly looking at the capital budgets. The capital budgets, as you know, are built based on a whole bunch of planning that you as council have approved over the years, your transportation master plan, your infrastructure services master plan, your development charges background study, but as well you have your state of good repair, your capital asset plan that infrastructure services looks after. They all inform what you're going to be spending for capital in the next 3 years. The strategic initiatives are already set. That is, you approve those as part of your term of council priority setting session, so you know exactly which capital projects will be included in the budget for the next 3 years. The debt financing, again, we are limited by your fiscal framework, which basically has us only issuing or authorizing debt equivalent to the amount that's retiring in the year, unless it's for a project that's considered a legacy project. And I do not believe we have any, I hadn't seen any yet in this next 3 years. Again, though, we are addressing the big concern that was raised in the last time we had the long-range financial plan, which was how much you're spending on rehabilitation of the assets you currently own. And there are additional funds built into this budget in each of the 3 years to increase the amount of contribution to capital beyond inflation. So you have a contribution, it's a catch-up basically for all the years where you didn't increase it at the rate it should be, and you also have an inflationary adjustment. The only thing I will say about the capital budget that we still need to look at, and I believe we've given direction on this already, is that the funding for the growth projects will need to be adjusted to reflect the actual development charge revenues that we've received. But based on what we had presented in the 2015 budget, the 2016, 17, and 18 budgets look like this. As you can see on the very first line, for tax-supported renewal of city assets, you're increasing that every year. Your growth is, there's some big growth numbers sort of back-ended, but this would reflect what you had approved as part of the development charges background study. And the strategic initiatives are all ones that you have already approved through the SI process. The big strategic initiative in 2018, which is causing the 221, is that your first big chunk of stage 2 of light rail. Rate supported is roughly, it's going from 288 to 307 million over the time period. You're continuing to invest in the renewal of rate-supported assets to be able to provide those valuable services to residents. So the timetable, as we mentioned, November 12th, all the budgets will be tabled with the council and the various boards and commissions at the same time. The first week after that is basically most of your advisory committees will be reviewing the budgets, and then the week After that, we will start with the committees, boards, and commissions, receiving public delegations, reviewing the budgets, and recommending or amending them for consideration by council on December 9th, at which time you have review and adoption. This is a really busy slide, shows you all the dates, but basically from November 23rd, don't plan anything from November 23rd to basically December 9th. So that is the schedule, and we're more than happy to take questions.
Great. Councillor Englai has a direction to staff that makes good sense, and then who would like to ask questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments to introduce the direction. So I have to say that I have some concerns that a 2% increase alone is going to be able to address our current situation. And I certainly, and I think everybody around this table and around the larger table in council chambers, don't want to have continuing problems in future years, like we're experiencing right now. We've heard before that cost savings will be found and efficiencies will be considered. This report speaks to those things again and is very ambitious in its scope. However, unfortunately, these reviews and changes have not always happened as quickly or in as deep or comprehensive a fashion as they should. We only have so many reserves, and we don't want to have to rely on them to parachute us out of these situations again and again. However, I believe 2% can work if it's coupled with a more formal and rigorous approach to cost savings. I don't want to find out too late that these initiatives are not happening or that they are not as effective as they are predicted to be. Therefore, I have the following direction for staff, which I hope will be accepted and embraced as our first step towards a more sustainable financial framework. And the direction goes as follows. I believe that it's on the screen, that the city manager work with the Office of the City Treasurer to develop a proposal to establish a corporate budget or challenge function to be funded within existing resources that will provide an effective and formal early warning system to identify any significant variances developing between departmental spending and or revenue budgets and their monthly actuals to allow for early course corrections if necessary, to oversee regular reviews of administrative spending and identify cross-departmental synergies and or options for administrative efficiencies, review the departmental plans to achieve their corporate expenditure reduction and efficiency targets, and provide a challenge function for those submissions as well as annual budget submissions, and develop a reporting mechanism for council that indicates where and when a course correction or efficiency opportunity was suggested and the actions taken or required. I bring this report to the December Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting for consideration along with FEDCO's budget. So everybody around this table and everybody around council table will know how staff intends to make these things happen so that we can work in partnership between the proposed tax increase and also finding those efficiencies and savings. So I'm hoping that staff will accept this, and I'm looking at the city manager when I say this, and be able to get back to us within that time frame with a comprehensive and substantive plan as to how we can keep track of these things and make sure that these savings are happening.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, please.
Chair, there's a lot in that motion, but I understand all of it, and I believe that we will be able to meet the December timeline with a process.
Thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, please. Question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know I will be all over the map with those questions, but I need to understand them. So in order for me to prepare for the budget. So, and I know maybe later on in the budget detail book will show, but are we expecting the same endowment from Hydro Ottawa this year than we did in the last year, or the number less or more?
You're speaking about the returns on our endowment fund?
That's right.
We would be expecting the same on the endowment fund. We're not going to be changing that.
Okay. Now, I have asked you before in the past about the unfunded liability with staff, and that number, after I receive it from you, it seems a little bit on a high. Is there a risk of reducing this number? And what is the risk?
The unfunded liability is it's a bit of a tricky question, only because what you're getting is an actuarial number, and the biggest driver on what that number is what the discount rate is. the rate of interest. So in a low interest rate environment, that number gets bigger. So if the interest rates go up, Isabel and I will look like heroes because that number will drop, but we will not have done anything. So what we have, though, is a plan in place to deal with unfunded liabilities that was approved a couple of years ago. We're looking at that again, and we'll be bringing that forward to FEDCO in the new year to reconsider what we had on the list and our strategies moving forward. You know, you're making progress in some areas. Your vacation liability, for example, is gradually shrinking. But when WSIB adds on a whole list of new cancers, that number is going to go up. And the question is how are you addressing that in your budget? So we are addressing those liabilities that come real in any year in the budget. But your unfunded portion, the part that the actuaries tell you that's the value of everything you have unfunded and it goes out for 25 years or whatever, the question becomes how much of that do you actually want to have set aside, or how much do you just want to deal with it each budget as it comes, as it materializes. So I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer at this point in time, but we are planning on bringing that back to you to make certain you understand where we are with unfunded liabilities and how comfortable you are with the strategies that we've adopted and the progress we're making to date.
Okay, well, that's great. One of the areas we made investment instead of being on the capital side, like the radio system perhaps we have, and I think that's quite a bit of saving from the capital budget. Is some of that funding is in the capital is going to be transferred to operation, because right now we're no longer collecting for this, and that's quite a bit of numbers. So I like, first of all, kudos to staff for coming that way, dealing with something, because the technology is changing a lot quicker than what we are changing our. So it is a good idea not to be in a purchase versus leasing or upgrading. So, but if you can shed some light on it, where we are at.
That's a good example of one of the strategies that we would be looking at with respect to the budget as well. The city doesn't have to own everything that it runs, and the radio system is a good example of that. We don't have to own the towers and the relay stations. That the private sector can provide that, and we can lease it. And in this case, what we're doing is we're turning what was a contribution to capital into lease dollars. Okay. And it transfers the risk onto the private sector to upgrade that. It takes us out of that game of continually trying to catch up with the technology. So we'll be looking at that with a number of the things that the city does. IT is probably a prime example. Do we need to have all those servers, or is there a way that we can move those out into, I hate to use the word, but the cloud? Like, can it be provided by the private sector, and the city gets out of the direct delivery or ownership of those particular assets? So that's a continual ongoing discussion that we're having, and it'll probably be accelerated as a result of looking at trying to find savings within the budget, because typically what you find is that your contribution to capital will be a little bit higher than your lease cost, because you've built in there the fact that you need to replace it at a later date.
So in a nutshell, the money we contribute to the capital now could be transferred to operational.
That's correct.
And maintain the level of that service.
That's correct.
With a cost saving quite a bit, basically.
With the cost savings, because you no longer are responsible to keep up with technology. That's the private sector has to deliver that to you. So that lease cost includes all the upgrades. You don't have to all of a sudden have a huge increase because you need to upgrade everything.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to Councillor Eglay's motion, I believe that's entirely consistent with the committee's approach to date for seeking efficiencies that will produce savings for the taxpayer. However, I must say I'm surprised that we're not already doing that as part of our management process here in the city. I'll be looking for staff to place a very clear priority on the potential reductions that target administrative costs versus the core services that our residents depend on. We can all remember back in 04-05 when there was talks about cutting, how often stopping cutting the grass, reducing snow plowing. That's not where we're looking for the savings. I'm hoping that we can stay focused on that. I'd like to ask a couple of specific questions, if I may, to what the Treasurer's presentation included. You highlighted in there sponsorship. What's your plan with the sponsorship piece here?
The sponsorship budget is underachieved by about $1.5 million every year. It's just to bring it down to reduce it by the $1.5 million, so it'll be at the level that we actually are achieving, so it won't cause a deficit. So the program will continue, but it's just being realistic about what the actual revenue target is for that program.
Why would we not look at moving that program to somebody like economic development that knows how to go out and promote new business and seek out opportunities like that? Because I agree with you, the program is underachieving. It's been very frustrating for me for the last 4 years to try to work within the program as it's established today. I'd rather see we just take it apart and put something better together, because it does have great potential.
I'll ask Mr. Kirkpatrick to speak to that.
Chair, 2 years ago we did in fact do exactly what Councillor Hubley is suggesting. Dan Chenier and his staff, I organized a meeting with them as well as with Saad Bashir and some of his staff in economic development. We came up with some different strategies in terms of who to target and in what segments. And so that work has happened, and frankly it's with that work that we've been able to achieve the base that we have. My own view, I share the Treasurer's perspective that that is a realistic target for revenues at this point in time, and I would not feel comfortable continuing to budget higher revenues than that. It's a deficit that we're planning for in the budget.
I don't have a problem, Mr. Patrick, with changing the budget amount. The problem I have is with the approach. For example, I have 2 of the properties that are on that list that came out when the program was first introduced. I have yet in 4 years to have anybody come to me with a proposal for those properties. The only proposals we have evaluated are proposals that I went out and put together as the ward councillor or sought out people that might be interested in doing this. I'd like to see an overhaul of the program so that any of the ones that are on that list and those that may be potentially added to that list, somebody's actually trying to do something with them so that we can achieve these, whatever the budget level is that we agree to.
So, Chair, I'm familiar with the 2 initiatives that you're talking about. The sponsorship program was a broader program. Part of the problem that we've had, frankly, in terms of achieving the corporate revenue target is that some of those significant projects, like the ones that you've highlighted, councillors are involved in, they feel very strongly about, and they're looking for the revenue that's generated from those to be reinvested in those facilities or in their wards. That's part of the reason that corporate revenue target has not been able to be achieved. But I hear what you're saying, which is you'd like to see some advancement on initiatives like the 2 in your wards. We will make sure that happens, but I really think we should adjust the budget downwards, and I hear you supporting that.
I agree. Thank you. The other question I have, Mr. Mayor, is we know a big part of this budget and every year's budget is to do with our salary costs, and we've been affected by the arbitration rulings. I find it frustrating, and I attended with Councillor Taylor and Brockington and Sherashenko this summer to actually meet with the provincial minister responsible and ask them to recognize that this municipality has budget discipline, and we bring in the 2% targets, and we ask all our managers to respect those 2% targets, yet we have arbitrators from outside the city not respecting those targets. One of the suggestions I'd like to have as part of this that maybe staff could look at and report back to us is some sort of a means or a program where we establish a dollar figure for those budgets instead of a percentage target, and that way, no matter what the arbitrator rules, that's the dollar value that those salaries are going to cost us. So if that means we have to find higher efficiencies to deliver 2.5 versus 2% on the salary budgets, then we would work with the stakeholders to do so. I would hope that we could have support for that idea. to investigate?
Chair, I can tell you that in the numbers that the Treasurer has presented to you this morning, we have made a provision that we think is conservative in that it is at the high end of what we would expect to see from arbitration. And that was, your Council will recall, in the 2015 the surplus deficit report that just went to Council, we had budgeted for something at the lower end of that settlement arbitrated award range, and that cost us in terms of a deficit this year. So what we're recommending here is that we would estimate the higher end of the range, which creates a larger gap, which identifies a target for base adjustments and efficiencies that's higher. If we are able to achieve lower than that through hard negotiations or well-prepared arbitration briefs, then that will be a contribution towards the base adjustment target that we're recommending to you today.
Will this higher target respect our 2% level, or is it going to be higher? Because that's what's causing the problem, is when the arbitration comes in higher than the 2%. Right.
So we've included in the estimates the maintenance costs, an estimate, a dollar value, as you were saying earlier, that represents what we think would be the higher end of the range that we might expect to see either from settlements or arbitrated awards. We want to be, that's when I said we're being conservative about that. We want to provide for the higher end of the range, negotiate or conduct an arbitration process to try to achieve something less than that. To your point, we don't want to talk about percentages at this point, but we have included in that dollar value envelope the higher end of the range, and hopefully we'll be able to do better than that. That won't be an unexpected pressure mid-2016 is what I'm saying.
Thank you. One other point is to add to this list, I didn't see it in here, we know that we have surplus property that we'd like to dispose of. I'm wondering if we can come up with a process to expedite that process. We often see one or two pieces of property on an agenda here at FEDCO, for example. I would like to see a much more robust process in place that we could look at what all we want to dispose of and try and move it faster. Would that be possible?
Chair, more than possible. In fact, that's something that Mr. McNair and his team have been working on over the last several weeks. We actually just briefed the Mayor last week on the scope of what we're planning to roll out. That we'll look at administrative space, also properties, program properties, and potential efficiencies we can make in the footprint of those, as well as identifying the most extensive program of surplus property disposition that we can over the next 3 years in order to meet some of the targets that are in these numbers.
Thank you. And page 14, we talk about the strategic initiatives in your report. And I just have a question, because the first big paragraph says, as approved by Council, all new capital strategic initiatives as reflected in the terms of Council priorities report are to be funded from the annual $20 million capital envelope. But in Table 5, we're showing strategic initiatives being $24 million, 71 growing to 221. Could you just clarify that for me, please?
What we've included in there is because you're doing $20 million of tax dollars, but there's some development charges in there, there's some revenues in there, so that's actually the amount, and that also includes transit in there as well, so that's why the number doesn't quite line up, but it is everything that you've approved plus what was in what's being funded from SIs not coming from taxation.
And is it possible as part of your review to also review the city's reserves? We have significant savings in there. This year is one of the years that the reserves are really going to come through for us. I'm just wondering if we're going to start doing a review of all our costs and where our money is and where it's going, would it not be prudent to do a review of the reserve levels, make sure that they're appropriate, maybe they can come down, maybe they should be up, but that review should take place?
That is one of the areas that we've been looking at and looking at other municipalities and how they've been looking at that. We've spoken to other municipalities on how they've managed their overall reserves, percentage levels
compared to operations or other metrics to actually manage it to a level that helps to smooth overall operations. So we are looking at best practices in that area.
Thank you. And last one from me for today, anyway, is invoicing, billing. Can we look at whether, for example, we would be better off going to Hydro Ottawa to have our water and tax bills processed, or is the city system more efficient, and then maybe we should be switching or adding more to it, such as Hydro?
A very timely question, Councillor, because we've just finished that review, and unfortunately, Ottawa Hydro couldn't compete with the private sector. So we will continue to have our own system for billing, and there's just, it was going to cost us more money to go to the hydro system than to have our own system.
But why is it, like we brought this up under Service on Ottawa a couple of years ago, the fact that someone was being charged, I think, $40 or $50 to have photocopies. I'm hearing every week from people that are being charged $50, $60 just to change the address on their accounts. Very, very simple processes, and yet we're charging these outrageous fees for it. I thought under Service Ottawa we were going to get away with it, take that away, but clearly we're not. So what can we do to
So first of all, we have now, you can get your water bills online. Anybody who gets a water bill can go on to My Service Ottawa and see their actual bill and print it from their home printer. So they do not have to come to us and request a photocopy of their water bill. And when we instituted that fee, Councillor, we were processing something like 20,000 requests a year. It dropped down to 4,000. So that's a significant amount of work that was taken off of our plate just because of the institution of a fee. We currently we've reduced the water fee for when you change your name on a water bill, but we still have a fee, and that is because we have to go in, and it's not a case of just changing the name. You actually have to go in and allocate what's the date, what was the water consumption at that date, start a new account. It's a more difficult process than you would think, and we have done a process where we have captured how much are the costs actually, and that's what we're charging. You approved that a couple of years ago when you approved a document which is our procedure in figuring out how we calculate our fees, and that's the rate we're at. With the movement from having to send a meter reader out to actually take a read to what we get now, the electronic information side, we were able to reduce that by roughly $20 a bill. But there still is a cost associated, and your fiscal framework says where we have a unique cost where we can identify work that a resident is basically causing the city, we are to charge them for that service.
User pay principle, I get that, Madam Treasurer.
Councillor, your time is up. We can put you back on the list if you like.
Sure, absolutely.
Mr. Kirkpatrick had one point to an item you had raised.
Thank you, Chair. Just, Councillor, you'd started off your comments and expressing support for Councillor Aglai's motion, but also some surprise that we aren't already doing that work, and I just want to make sure that you don't need to be surprised. We do a lot of the elements of that motion, in particular focusing on the status of actual expenditures against budget and variances, but the motion, goes beyond that and talks about what I focused on was, and I think the intent of the motion is that Council would like to see a more formalized, comprehensive process, particularly with respect to identifying efficiencies and reporting on how management intends to achieve those efficiencies, and then actual success in doing so. So you can rest assured management's very focused on budgets and variances to them. I was focusing more on the other two elements of the motion.
Thank you.
Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number of questions. I just wanted to start by saying I certainly absolutely agree with you that it is incumbent upon this council to work hard to keep taxes as low as possible and to be as efficient as we can with every tax dollar that we spend. I didn't, however, agree with your initial statement that every member of this committee campaigned on 2% or less, because I didn't campaign on a number. I just wanted to make that point. Ms. Zimmer, my first question question to you is around what appears to be a recommendation to run multi-year operating deficits and then backfill the deficit with capital one-time resources. My impression was that local governments aren't allowed to run deficits. Maybe this is a paper exercise, but it appears like a deficit in the way that it's presented. So can you just comment on the legislation and how much flexibility there is?
The legislation requires that we have a balanced budget, which means that our revenues have to match our expenditures, and that's exactly what we're proposing here. So the expenditures, the additional expenditures in 2016 will be partially offset by taking money that would have been spent on fleet and spending it on something else. But it's all tax dollars. So whether you spend it on a vehicle or whether you spend it on winter maintenance, it's still a tax dollar. So it's balanced at the end. So we are in complete accordance with the legislation, with what we are proposing here.
Okay, so there's nothing in legislation that speaks about operating versus capital budgets?
No, there isn't.
Okay. My next question is, just looking at the base pressures, can you tell us where we landed in terms of the deficit when everything was rolled up together, transit and the ones that were reported on previously at FEDCO? What was the overall deficit number, projected number in 2015?
If I remember correctly, we were at $52 million, I do believe.
Can you state that as a tax? 1% equals what?
1% generates $14 million.
So 52 is?
So you would basically have 3%, 4% actually. 4%?
So basically, we have to find 4% in the base before we even deal with 2016 pressures.
No, because a lot of the pressures that you have in 2016, first of all, some of that is coming from the water area, so that's dealt with outside of this. A number of those things were, again, were one time, which we don't anticipate to repeat, so we're not adjusting for one-time issues in the budget. So, but your target overall is about 4%. So yes, you're correct.
Okay. So between the 2% or 1.75 plus efficiencies and increased fees, we have to make up 4% on the base is basically what we're looking at?
No, with your efficiencies and with your tax increase of 1.75, you don't have to find anything on the base. I don't think I am understanding your question, Councillor.
Okay, I just want to understand what the target is, but we can talk about that a little bit more offline. Mr. Kirkpatrick, my next question to you is to you in terms of these efficiencies. Last year I was asking when we built the budget about how much risk was built into the budget because I was quite concerned that there were things in there that were unattainable and unachievable and we were going to end up with a deficit which seems to have come to pass. So I guess when we're looking at building the 2016 budget with efficiency targets and there's not a lot of narrative around those efficiency targets and how we're going to achieve that, Mr. Kirkpatrick, I want to hear from you where you start to find those efficiencies and how confident you are in the attainability of that.
Well, Chair, if you look on page 11 in the report and that line that the councillor's asking about, that's efficiencies base adjustments, and over the 3 years it indicates that we need to find about $47 million there, which is a large number. I can tell you that at this point in time, management, we have pretty solid ideas about how to achieve something in the order of $17 or $18 million of that. Over the 3 years that I know council will find acceptable. So sitting here today, we're looking at about a $30 million target over those 3 years. And as the Treasurer was indicating in her presentation, that is very front-ended, but we're recommending a strategy in order to, as in the Treasurer's words, to create some runway for ourselves that would allow us, a target of about 8 million, 10 million, and 12 million in 2016, 17, and 18. Given that strategy to create that runway, that will be work for sure, but I am comfortable with savings targets in that range, given the amount of time that management will have to focus on them, using some of the processes that Councillor Egli has asked for in his motion, consulting with council, and making sure that everyone, council and the public and management, has real clarity on how that's to be achieved.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And my goal is to keep this budget real so that we're not putting in numbers that are unattainable. We have to deal with really achievable targets in this budget. And I, of course, like Councillor Egli, will want to know more about how that goes as we move forward. I just wanted to give you my priority as a member of council in terms of finding efficiencies, and the city treasurer said that we would assign efficiencies across the corporation to all departments. My preference would be to look for more efficiencies internal to the organization than frontline services. So the ones that are in the community, garbage and snow removal and parks, the things that interface with the residents every day are the ones that I think should be the last to be addressed. The ones that are internal here, our programs and our systems and the way that we deliver services that really doesn't have a big impact on the public, I think that we need to start there and look for how we might change our operations internally to address these efficiencies as opposed to externally frontline services to the community. So that would just be my view.
Mr. Kirkpatrick has a comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, Councillor, I think I know what the intent is, but just to be clear, we'll be looking for efficiencies everywhere. Mm-hmm. And as you know, most of our spending is in the frontline service areas. So winter maintenance is a good example of that. And you've already heard at the last FEDCO meeting some of Mr. Wiley's plans to try to identify efficiencies in winter maintenance. I think, if I just be clear, I think what you're talking about is you don't want to see service level adjustments
Correct.
in frontline services, and we understand that. To use the language that the Mayor used in his presentation, we get that the Council's focus is to protect core services and Council service priorities, and we'll do so.
Okay, so exactly my point. I don't want to see an erosion of services because I think the community really values the services that the city provides. I also wanted to ask, I'm not sure who would be the best, maybe the Mayor or Mr. Kirkpatrick, to answer this question, but do we have some sort of policy watch on the upcoming federal election, and does that outcome of that election impact the 2016 budget?
So we do have a policy watch. As an example, I was just in discussions with Mr. Carlton of FCM last month, and we'll be having some phone calls with myself and some of my peers in some of the major Canadian cities. A lot of that's very focused, as you might expect, on infrastructure and capital programs, but there is the potential, we think, for the results of the federal election to have impacts on things like social housing and others. So, and I know you're very well versed in these things, Councillor, but most of the policy agenda items at FCM does a good job on behalf of the Canadian municipalities in pushing the federal government on from a policy perspective. We're watching all of those, and there is the potential, depending on what happens in that election or the election that may follow shortly thereafter, to have an effect on the budget frame for this city over the next 3 years.
Okay, so just in terms of timelines, will that be reflected in the budget document?
My own sense of that, Chair, is that, and I've actually talked to a couple of deputy ministers at the federal government about this, there'll be a period of 3 or 4 months following the election before the policy agenda of the new government is established. And then, as I mentioned, it's possible, I think if you're looking at the polling results right now, that government could be in flux. So I don't think that there's a lot of potential to affect the 2016 budget, but certainly the 17 and 18 views.
Okay. Just two more brief questions, and one is on the 2% that seems to be embedded for the remainder of the term. Is Council, if we pass this today, bound by that number?
I could answer that question, but Mr. O'Connor doesn't like it when I do that, so I'll pass that to the city clerk.
The answer is no, Mr.
Thank you. And just one final question. Councillor Hubley raised the issue of reserves and seemed to suggest that our reserves are in good state, and that wasn't my impression at all. In fact, I thought we had depleted our general capital reserves to the point that we had to cut our 2015 capital program to shore up the money needed. Now, I, of course, know that we have money in development charge reserves, but that money is collected under a specific development charge bylaw and only allowed to be used for the specific reasons that it was collected. So I just wondered if you could comment on the overall state and health of our general capital reserves.
So first of all, we didn't cut our 2015 capital program. What we did was we went in and we closed projects that were finished, that had money left on them, or where we knew tenders had come in that were lower, so they would eventually have surplus. And we brought that money back to deal with your 2015 deficit. The state of our reserves is it's mixed, quite honestly. There are some reserves which I think have probably have too much money in them, and I don't know if we have a way of adjusting that in the future. And there are some reserves which I think do not have sufficient funds in them. But I don't want to prejudge this at this point in time. This is part of the work that Isabel and her group are looking at, is what should be the amount that we have in each reserve to allow us to have the flexibility to deal with things that come up all of a sudden, and what are sort of the best practices out there. But honestly, my own impression, Councillor, is that it's a mixed bag. Some are really good, some not so good.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's Councillor Deans. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and appreciate Councillor Eagly's direction, and certainly I support that direction to staff, and understand we've had some discussion about whether we do or don't do some of that right now. My question, and there'll be lots more as we move through the budget process, but I just wanted to ensure that as we look into the efficiencies that we're looking at finding, particularly with respect to administrative, I always approach the function of our service delivery to our residents from two aspects. One, the amount of money we ask of them in terms of taxes to provide those services. And two, the amount of pressure that we put on city staff to deliver them. And we had a bit of a discussion before at a previous FEDCO about our long-term disability costs for staff at the city. And thank you very much, Marion, for your office providing me with the information. And I just want to put the plug in right now that as we kind of embark upon this cliff dive into what kind of efficiencies we can look at, I'm always conscious and guided by the fact that as much as we provide services with assets like trucks and, in parks and that kind of thing, by and large they're delivered by our people, and our people are a huge cost for us. And they can be a huge tool, but they can also be a pressure. So, when I look at the numbers that were provided from 2009 to now, our net FTE count in the city has gone down, but our budget pressure, because of those going on long-term disability, has gone up by about $7 million in that same period. So, there's a tipping point somewhere. I want to make sure that we're putting the appropriate pressure on, the administration in order to find efficiencies and deliver those things, that we're putting the pressure on our systems, that we're putting the pressure on our processes, but we're not putting a disproportionate amount of pressure on our staff to the point where, they're struggling to deliver some of what we're asking. So I guess my ask of you is that between yourself and Mr. Kirkpatrick, you ensure that as you're looking at where we can tighten up these processes, we either include human resources in the conversation, or at least use to some degree an HR lens in this to ensure that we're not simply trading one pressure today for another pressure tomorrow. So it's not so much a question as it is a direction, and perhaps more discussion on it later as we move into the budget process more formally.
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Chair. Couldn't agree more with the dynamic that Councillor Taylor is speaking to, and I can tell you just as recently as last week, the Executive Committee met with Marion Phillips of HR, and we were looking at some high-level statistics with respect to leave, sick leave, disability, overtime. Frankly, we do that every quarter, but we're looking at it in more depth right now to try to understand, are there relationships that we should be aware of in terms of the options that we're going to pursue to find these efficiencies. There's a lot of things that are happening demographically with the city's workforce in terms of aging, but frankly, we see that you can focus on a citywide statistic, but you really need to get down to a departmental and even into a work unit level to see the variances that exist below or above that average.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning. In the interest of time, I'll just get straight to my questions. Does FEDCO receive a semi-annual or annual list of either surplus properties to the city's needs or underutilized properties that we potentially own but have the possibility of amalgamating one building with another and then selling the other building off? Does that exist?
The Chair, the information certainly exists as part of Council's policy on disposition of surplus properties. There's a circulation of identified surplus properties to departments, to ward councillors. I don't think it has come as a consolidated report, but I can tell you, as part of my answer to Councillor Hubley's question earlier, that program of space review, as well as a 3-year program to disposal of property, we'll be bringing that as a report to FEDCO in the new year in terms of identifying the properties that we would like this committee to say, yes, go sell those properties over the next 3 years.
Right.
Just on that, I know Councillor Monette also asked for a comprehensive list, so it's certainly on my agenda and other members of council, because it's the challenge we have when we have surplus property that is not sold. It's a 2-time loss. We lose the one-time sale, which would go to the capital fund, and we lose ongoing property tax revenue. So we have a very aggressive strategy to pick up the pace of selling properties that are considered surplus, and I thank members of council for their input on that.
Good. I appreciate. I have no idea, what lands exist outside of my ward, and I'm sure there might be even parcels in River Ward I'm not aware of. But I'd like to see that report, and I appreciate that coming forward. With respect to debt, just a clarification on a comment that our treasurer made. She indicated that no legacy projects over the next few years have been identified to incur additional debt. When we do make debt payments, are we strictly making interest or interest and principal payments?
Interest and principal.
Okay. So as we erode some of that principal, are you reissuing debt to make up that spot that is now available, or is our principal over the next few years, because we aren't going to engage in any new legacy project, going to go down?
The debt that retires in the year is reissued. Okay. So if you have $40 million in principal that drops off, we reissue $40 million.
With respect to the transit levy of the proposed 2.5% increase, will that negate the need for a fare increase, or is OC Transpo looking at the possibility of also a fare increase?
As I mentioned in the slide, there is part of their strategies are looking at revenue options, including fares, and they have set a target of roughly $6.7 million a year in terms of revenues and user fees.
Which would partly include a fare increase?
That's part of your fiscal framework for your strategy for user fees, yes.
Okay. And with respect to capital projects that are projected, I assume staff have looked at the capital projects for both short-term, medium, and long-term for the city. There are some that I know we would not consider postponing, like LRT, for example, but are there other smaller or medium-term sized capital projects that the city could postpone and not spend those monies in the next 1 to 3 years without negatively affecting what it would cost taxpayers to embark on those capital projects if we deferred it 3 years?
You basically have three categories of capital. The first one is the strategic initiatives, which you've already approved. Those are things you want to see go forward. The second one is your growth projects, and those are determined by your development charges background study and the amount of development charges that we receive. So that's all, and it's almost to a large part, it's funded from development charges, not from tax dollars or rate dollars. And then the last piece is your renewal of assets, and you're significantly behind in terms of your investment in renewal. And so I do not think if I went to the engineers and said, is there anything that you could defer, that they would come forward with a big list.
Well, I wouldn't suggest us deferring anything that our engineers say is critical, but I'm sure there are capital projects, other non-critical capital projects, that as a possibility could be deferred. And so I was simply asking that question. My final comment would be similar to lines that Councillor Hubley raised about the possibility of amalgamating service delivery with perhaps other municipalities with respect to either invoicing our own citizens or even providing internal services, whether it be HR services or other. But certainly coming from the federal government, we had very localized services being provided to employees, and then over the last few years a shift to more centralized approach where services that were provided in the department were no longer provided. You would call a 1-800 number and have that services then. Just similar now, if I have questions related to OMERS, my own personal benefits, I don't speak to anyone at City Hall. I call a 1-800 number, and that operator deals with other requests that come all over Ontario. So I'm sure we've considered that, but certainly questions get raised, and even constituents suggest that we look at what services are provided internally to our employees or internally to our own residents, and thinking about working with other municipalities for service delivery. So it would not take away the services that our own residents receive or even our own employees. It's just a way to streamline and through economies of scale save money. So just a point, but I do appreciate, Mr. Mayor, the work that's gone into the presentation. I know this has not been easy, but I would like to applaud the Treasurer and her staff on this report and the details and the plan that's in place, and I think it's overall very good.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Barrington. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we're looking at efficiencies for the next 3 years, how comfortable are we that we can achieve those efficiencies?
Chair, as I said in response to Councillor Deans, I think I would not be confident at all if we were needing to achieve them in the timeline that the pressures materialize, front-ended to 16, but the strategy of creating that runway to be able to focus on 8 million, 10 million, and 12 million over the 3 years, I'm confident. I will say that there's a lot of work that will have to take place. There'll be some difficult decisions that need to be made, and I think that, frankly, it's why I think Councillor Aguilar's motion is an important one, is that, as I said earlier, there needs to be clarity on how we expect to achieve these efficiencies, what will be involved in doing so, and that should be reported to Council as we go forward.
Thank you. When we look at the efficiencies that Mayor Watson brings forward, 1.5 to 16, 1% to 217, 1% to 18, I agree that it is quite achievable if we are a large city with a large budget, and we should be able to meet those goals. Having heard some comments through the media, I'm glad I didn't hear any around the table today, about throwing out different budget scenarios, 2, 3, and 4%. From experience of having been on the council that did try that approach, I would caution the council to take that approach. I think if you look at one thing, we had a budget consultation with Councillor Tierney, Blais, and Mittek at Place Orleans and myself. The comments we were getting from the residents overall was they were glad that we were keeping it at 2% and that this was going to be what they could plan on and budget on. And as an example of a council that did go the other route, it was a council that I sat on, Councillor Elchantiri sat on, Councillor Dean sat on, and we looked at 2007, we were all happy to come in at 0%. 2008, we came in at 4.9%. 7.5% for OC Transpo. 2009, 4.9%. I think what we have to look at as a council is remember what the community was like and what the community felt like when we were coming in with those rates. One thing that we've learned from 2010 to 2015 is stability in the budget is what is important for the residents of Ottawa. We have seen it over and over again in the last 5 years. When it comes to public consultation, the public is saying stay the course. What's important for the residents is not zero, is stability. We are not saying zero means zero. We are saying 2% equals stability. In the time of recession, I would caution members of council to look at increasing anything higher than 2%. In fact, in the past councils from 2010 to 2015, we've been able to meet our goal and come in under what was stated. And I hope that we would work hard as a council and achieve that once again. Just some words of advice from someone who's been through 4 years that I would not really want to go through that experience again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Monette. Councillor Egli, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to follow up on one of the comments made by the Treasurer around the reserves and the feeling that some reserves have too much and some reserves have too little. And I'm thinking in this particular plan, for example, we're taking quite a bit out of the fleet reserves. So I'd be curious, and I guess this is a question to you and also a question to legal. First of all, when do you think you might be able to tell us, from your professional expert opinion, which you think have too much and which you think have too little? And to legal, are there any impediments to moving money from one reserve to another reserve under the existing legislation?
So maybe on the legal point first, Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. As most councillors are probably aware, you establish particular reserve funds for a particular reason, and you are not holus bolus allowed to willy-nilly move funds back and forth as you see fit. So if you've set them aside for one particular issue, you are, under the current legislation, required to use them for that matter.
And the Treasurer?
Well, I hate to disagree with the lawyer, but you actually have in every reserve bylaw you have, or for any other purpose that council deems appropriate. So that's why you can take any tax-funded reserve that you have and use it for any tax-supported service that you deem appropriate. The vehicle reserve is funded strictly from tax dollars. So that's why you could use it to go into the tax-supported budget. You could not use that reserve to go into the rate-supported budget, and you cannot use that reserve to go into the transit budget. But you can use it for the tax-supported budgets of the City of Ottawa. Every one of your reserves, though, as the city treasurer or city solicitor indicated, have specific uses. Some of those are very general. Some of those uses may have changed over time. I question the need for the number of reserves we have, given the fact that at the end of the day, everybody relies on the citywide reserve. So why am I doing all this accounting to have all these little bits of money all over the place for all these special interest areas, quite frankly? That's part of the strategy that we need to come forward with. We were not planning on coming forward with that review of the reserves till probably late in 2016, but we'll see whether we can accelerate that or not.
Okay, I guess where I was going with this is, and I'm still a little confused, is if you're not allowed to do it, then why would you expend the resources in looking at it? So I'm still a little bit between the two, legal and finance, as to whether if you go through the exercise, you'll actually be allowed to move things around.
No, Mr. Mayor, perhaps to be clear, and I don't think the Treasurer and I are disagreeing, I said with regards to the legislation, that is the requirement. With regards to how we actually build and which funds we build, according to the Treasurer, that's correct, that we do have that.
So the exercise is worth it then. Okay, thank you.
Good point of clarification. Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a lot of good questions already asked, so I won't ask those. But I was looking at what we did at OC Transpo, which the staff came back to say because of the costs, they actually eliminated 5 managers and took out a lever of bureaucracy. We haven't reviewed our whole management structure for some time now, and we have gone to a lot of work to do using technology to change the way we do things. And we do still have a lot of levels in the city and everything else. So as part of this efficiency type of thing that we're going to do, are we going to take a very strong look? It's a good time to do it now. We're having major changes at the senior level coming up, and it's a good time to look at that whole organization and see if we can structure it so that there would be some savings resulting from that exercise.
Chair, the report identifies some examples of the kinds of reviews that staff are recommending that we undertake. One of those you'll see in the report is an administrative review. We chose that term with some thought behind it. We will be looking at the management structure of the city, the portfolios, the spans of control that are within that management structure, but we'll also be looking at below management to all levels of administration to see if there's opportunities to change.
Yeah, I think doing it by department doesn't work as well as having the overall view of it, because there may be some things being duplicated. In fact, in a big organization that does happen, and I know we've been trying to bring things back so that we don't have this department having this facility and that one wanting something and not sharing.
Chair, I totally agree. That's why the example of administrative review is actually an example that's provided under the heading of corporate reviews, so that will be done on a corporate basis.
And how long is it going to take to do all of that, or is it going to be ongoing?
Exactly. It's more of an ongoing effort. I would look with the first 6 months of 2016 will be focused on that, but there'll be different levels of it. Then when we get the new
city manager in, that person obviously is going to want to have a hard look on it. Okay. The other question thing, because I chair Auto Community Lands, we are putting our report for the last term of council at next council meeting, which has brought considerable funds into the city, but we don't get all the properties for sale. And so I think there's been some review of some of them are very tiny little things that just the staff deal with on a day-to-day basis. We tend to get the larger ones, but we're going to run out of properties to sell sometime. So I think it's important that we look at everything we have. And the other aspect of it is when we know we're going to need land in a few years' time, whether we shouldn't be moving forward in some things ahead of time, because if we wait, it usually costs 2 to 3 times more. And I think there needs to be developed a strategy on our land needs, not just to dispose of surplus lands, but to recognize and prepare for when we need lands, whether it's for road widenings or for environmental reasons. There's several different ways. So I'd like to see some of that going on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have no one else on the speakers list. So we have Councillor Eglai's direction to staff, which has been agreed to by staff, and on the report is presented. Carried. Does anyone have a notice of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? Est-ce qu'il y a un avis de motion? Any written inquiries, Madam Clerk? Other business? Adjournment. Motion to adjourn? Carried. Next meeting, le 3 novembre, 3rd of November. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Merci.